Sorry for that noise. The dogs are barking in the background and please forgive me, I don't have a film studio here. And I'm not going to edit this video. Now, so if you're buying a puppy from me, you are buying a dog with documents, and that's an important factor. Any breeder which charges you one price for a puppy with papers and another price without papers, get away from that breeder. They're not selling you a pure breed. They're not selling you a dog with any standards or any kind of goal. They're just selling you an animal like they would sell you a toaster. That's not a proper breeder who breeds and sells you one price for with papers, one price without papers. It's just totally incorrect behavior on the part of a breeder. So, breeders fall into 2 or 3 categories and buyers fall into 2 or 3 categories. This video is intended for the serious buyer who's a connoisseur of a specific breed, and it's intended for breeders who, there's a lot of new young breeders coming into the market which are following the latest trends or whatever they hear, a bunch of old wives' tales, and they're not listening to older breeders which have been doing this for a while, who have an understanding of selection, biology, genotype, phenotype, breeding with a goal, and proper selection of animals. So this is meant to educate the buyer, and it's meant to educate the younger breeders, the younger guys coming to the market, which I hope you will listen to this video because there's a lot of biology involved in what I'm describing if you also look at the other videos on my channel. First, to the buyers. So there's a couple of different kinds of buyers. The first kind of buyer is looking for the lowest priceable price. They're the price haggler. They will haggle with you on the price of a puppy because their attitude is everything is a negotiation. You're not buying a car where you're haggling with a salesperson. You're buying a dog from a breeder which put a lot of love and effort into raising those animals, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of care and devotion to the mother dog. She might need a C-section, which is $3,000 to $4,000 depending on the situation. She might be bleeding and might reabsorb a puppy. So veterinary care is expensive. These people's psychology is dogs should be free or nearly free. Well, that's just the wrong psychology because the veterinarian gets paid. The company that makes puppy food gets paid. The groomer gets paid. The dog trainer gets paid. There's a lot of professions tied to the production of dogs, from food to toys for dogs to veterinarians for dogs. Yet people feel the breeder somehow is greedy because he has to get paid for his work in producing puppies. That's the wrong attitude because without the breeder there would be no other way for these other things to exist. There wouldn't be food companies selling you kibble or any kind of cooked food or raw food or whatever you have as your preference. That wouldn't need to exist if there were no breeders. There would not be need for vets because vets depend on puppies being born which become adult dogs in order to give them medical care. Without breeders, none of this happens. So the first type of buyer is the bargain shopper. They're looking for the cheapest possible price and they don't care about quality. That's the first group of buyers. The second group of buyers buys on a lark. It's Christmas time or it's a holiday. They see an ad on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. It's convenient, it's nearby. They kind of like that breed and they always admired it. And they just go on the lark and let's go get a puppy. That sounds like a great idea. So they go buy a puppy. This second category of buyers is not bargain shopping necessarily, but they're not putting a lot of thought into researching the breed and how it will affect their lifestyle and their current situation and their timing. For example, I had a man who bought a terrier. Terriers are kind of noisy, and he had to work from home. All of a sudden, that 2-month terrier, which was a beautiful puppy for the children, 4 months later now is a 6-month-old terrier, and he's yapping and making a lot of noise, and he has to work from home. He has to have quiet in the house to be on the phone all day and be in meetings. Well, what did he do? He took that terrier, which was only 4 months ago, a puppy that he loved, supposedly, took it to the animal shelter and just dumped it. That puppy got a needle and was killed. And it didn't deserve to die simply for being a noisy a terrier. Imagine that. A terrier that is noisy got killed for being noisy. Terriers are noisy. So people have to think ahead of what that breed and its characteristics mean in your busy lifestyle. Now, the same person could have hired a dog walker, take the puppy for a walk. He could have put the puppy in a cup puppy kindergarten and had the puppy in a play area with other dogs. Worst comes to worst, he could have put a bar collar on the dog. In other words, there was other solutions, but giving the dog away and have it killed. So the second type of buyer buys quickly without much thinking. They're not necessarily bargain shopping, but they're buying out of convenience, and it sounds like a great idea at the moment. They're not thinking it through. The third type of buyer, which is the type of buyer I prefer to deal with, thinks it through and puts a lot of thought into researching the breed. They want to get the right breed. They want to get the right breeder. They're looking for very specific attributes in the animal they're buying. For example, if they're buying a German Shepherd, they know something about German Shepherds prior to buying it. If they're buying a Cane Corso, they know something about Cane Corsos before buying it. There was a recent movie made with Jason Statham, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, where there's a Belgian Malinois in that movie. Got a good-looking dog, you got a good-looking guy. All of a sudden, everybody went out and got Belgian Malinois. They think they're cool. They wouldn't get the dog that took down Osama bin Laden. Well, that's not the right dog for most families. That's the most highest surrendered breed. Why? Because it's a high energy breed, it's a highly intelligent breed, it needs to work, and most people don't have the bandwidth to give this dog the outlet that it wants. Also, a lot of them bred from KNPV lines. The Royal Dutch Police Dog Sport is KNPV, for those who don't know. And these dogs have a genetic need to bite. Not out of aggression, they just want to bite something. They just want to carry something in their mouth, and they just have a need to bite. Because they're bred to bite. They're bred to bite. People wearing a bite suit, and that behavior translates into police dog training, which is what they're bred for. They become police dogs. And the KNPV prides itself in producing dogs which can become police dogs. So imagine that, a Malinois which wants to bite, bites. Well, it's been bred to bite, generation after generation. It's been bred to take down suspects which will fight back. So it has a high pain tolerance. The same thing with German Shepherds from working lines. They, not at the same degree, but they like to bite because they're a herder. They want to herd something, and biting and prey are natural instincts in this dog. So a lot of people in this last category of buyers research the breed before buying them. They don't mind waiting. They know it's a 6-month heat cycle between breedings for most females. So they don't mind waiting, they don't mind putting a deposit, and they don't mind waiting. These are the type of buyers I prefer dealing with because they welcome a new dog into their life the way they would wait for a baby to come into their life. It's planned, it's thought through, they probably have previous dog ownership experience, and therefore they make the ideal buyer for my puppies and other serious breeders which produce dogs not for the mass market but for people who are fanciers of a specific breed. So those are 3 categories of buyers: the bargain shopper, the spur of the moment buyer, and the considerate buyer, which thinks things through. So those are the categories of buyers. Now what about breeders? Breeders are even worse. There are some breeders which breed in volume simply to make a buck because the money comes from volume, not from the sale of an individual puppy. I don't think breeding dogs is something that can replace your 9-to-5 job, so I do it as a hobby, but I take the hobby seriously. I import dogs from Europe, I try to title my dogs, I do orthopedic hip x-rays on my parent dogs, I do genetic testing on my dogs. And there are other people who are like me, who take breeding dogs seriously and want to improve the breed as part of the breeding process. On the other hand, you have people who will not take their dogs back if something happens to the owner, like a medical condition. For example, I had a person who was a veteran of the Afghani and Iraq War, who had serious back pain and needed to be in a wheelchair post-surgery, and in my contract there's the ability to take the puppy back. I took the puppy back because he had a surgery and required to give the dog back. No good breeder will allow their animal to wind up in an animal shelter. If they raise it from the time it was born to the time it's growing up, you don't want to see that animal killed with a needle. So no good breeder will not take their dog back if the owner is facing a serious health condition. These are what I call ethical hobby breeders. They're not necessarily in it for the profit, but they're in it for the improvement of the breed. On the other hand, you have unscrupulous breeders which breed any two dogs. They're not related, they're not researched, they're not planned. They might have poor temperaments, they might be healthy, they might be unhealthy. They just breed to make a profit. That's a category of breeder which is not a good breeder. Breeding dogs involves a certain degree of planning, and to plan a breeding requires understanding genetics. Alright, so you have unscrupulous breeders and you have also unscrupulous buyers. This video is not about that. This video is about what is phenotype versus genotype and how do you plan the breeding. In order to create a successful line of dogs, a breeder may get frustrated if they're not seeing the characteristics in their dog that they're looking for. And they think, oh, well, because of inbreeding depression, I'm having failure. Therefore, they outcross to somebody else's line, all of a sudden those dogs come out great, and they feel, oh, this is the solution. What they see, however, is they're seeing hybrid vigor. That one nick in the chain of breeding unrelated animals produced a good result, but it's only in that one generation that it produced a good result. It's not something that can be passed further. There's no prepotency. What they're not seeing is they had poor selection of the animals involved, and that's why they're not seeing the result they want to see. The other thing they need to understand is an animal is a combination of polygenetic traits. In other words, when you're breeding an animal, you may be focused on one attribute. Let's say the long coat. Let's say in a German Shepherd, you want a long-coated German Shepherd. Why? Well, a long-coated German Shepherd, let's say, commands $5,500 per puppy, as an example. And let's say a standard coat German Shepherd commands $2,500 to $3,000 per puppy, as an example. Now, if I'm breeding for profit, I want to breed this one attribute, the long coat. Again, I'm breeding by phenotype and one attribute, the long coat. I'm not breeding by genotype. Now, on the other hand, remember, the dog is not just coat. The dog is a complete animal with many, many traits. Skeletal structure, vigor, heart and liver health, eyesight, speed in running, proper limbs in terms of easty-westy, in terms of the rear legs, in terms of the angulation of the rear paws. Strong or weak hocks. You don't want a dog which walks on its hocks. Now, so the animal is a combination of polygenetic traits, many, many traits which make up that animal. If a breeder is focused only on one attribute, which is his market, or his market niche, that breeder, if he doesn't get what he wants, will discard the animal at a low price and just get rid of it. But if you're, let's say, breeding by performance, the dog, let's say, exhibited high in trial scores, and you breed a high in trial male to a high in trial female. Now, you're not breeding in a specific attribute, but you're breeding on a combination of attributes that made that animal athletic, successful, resilient, intelligent, and easily trainable. So you're breeding the total animal. And remember, it's not enough to breed one trait. You have to breed the total animal, the total package. So, do I want to buy a puppy, if I was a buyer, let's say, not a breeder, from a person that only focuses on coat color or coat type? I would not, because that may look very attractive to me, and that may look great to my eye. I'm pleased with that appearance of the animal, but that's not what makes the total animal. The animal could be a nerve bag and be a fear biter. Do I then want this animal in my household? Obviously not, right? So what I'm saying is, be careful of breeders which breed only one attribute as their main focus. They're not breeding the total animal. Now, will this animal, which exhibits, let's say, a performance pedigree of mother and father, pass that to the next generation? The answer is, to some degree they will, but not to the degree you expect. There was a study done in the 1920s after World War I. If you remember, World War I was 1914 to 1918. And a lot of our soldier boys came from the front blind. And they wanted to develop a program for teaching dogs to reliably guide a blind person. They imported 100 dogs out of Austria and Germany, even though it was not an ally at that time. It was this was before World War II. This was World War I. Never mind. Well, the German Shepherd still came out of Germany, whether you liked Germany or not. The German Shepherd was a German breed. So 100 dogs were imported, plus 3 or 4 trainers. They gave housing for these people, food, accommodations, and salary. And they bought 100 dogs, which had to all be fed. Do you know how many dogs were successful in guiding a blind person in that 100 dogs? 3. It's 3% success rate, 97% failure rate. But then they bred these 3 dogs to each other, and the next generation of dogs from these dogs were taught to guide the blind. Guess how many were successful? All of them. So within the German Shepherd breed, it's the same breed, but the attributes in that dog which would be good for guiding a blind person were chosen from the dogs which already were good service dogs in and of themselves, and therefore those attributes passed. Let's say I want a German Shepherd which is good at herding sheep. If you follow this breed, you know a gentleman named Carl Fuller who teaches dogs. He's no longer alive, but there's a kennel called the Kirchenthal kennel in Germany, where they used to call the tending style, where the 2 dogs form a living fence, where the sheep herd is here and the 2 dogs walk the line between the 2 sheep to keep the sheep contained. It's called the tending style as opposed to the eye style of the collie. The border collie stares down the sheep and intimidates them in order to get them to move. German Shepherd herding is done what's called the tending style, not the eye style of the border collie. In any event, his dogs have a proclivity to sheep which is almost genetic. Very little training is being done. The need to herd sheep is inborn into the animal, so there's not much training that has to be done. The shepherd just guides the dog and it follows its natural instincts in herding sheep. Other German Shepherds are from police bite sports. The genetics is already there. Your work as a trainer is to bring it out. It's not something you have to train the dog to have. It's already in the animal, the characteristics you desire. Retrieve drive, high prey drive, pain tolerance, ability to persevere in the face of adversity, hunt drive. These characteristics are already there. You can't train what's not there in the first place. You're just bringing it to the surface and to the highest extent possible. So here's one breed, the German Shepherd, but here's dogs which were used to guide the blind. Here's dogs which were used to herd sheep, the Kirchenthal line. And here are dogs which are good for police work. Now, it's one breed, but they're all very different dogs. So when you're breeding dogs, you have to understand that you're not breeding the breed as a whole, but you're breeding a specific gene subpool within the breed, meant for a specific task. And therefore you're breeding that sub-gene pool of the gene pool at large. I hope that makes sense. Now, in order to concentrate those genes, you have to inbreed or linebreed to create prepotency. What does that mean? It means if I take a prepotent male, usually it's the male, and I take a non-inbred female and I pair them together, even though each parent is 50-50 of the child, the prepotent male in this example has a high degree of homogeneous genes from his father or grandfather. So essentially he's a recreation of his grandfather in this example. His qualities will outpower the female. Now in dog breeding, mitochondrial DNA is very important. So you could take a weak male, not that great, and a superior female, and you'll still get good pups. But the opposite is not true. If you have a superior male and an inferior female, you will still have inferior pups. So a good mother with a good mitochondrial line, which she gives to both sons and daughters, will compensate for a poor male. But a strong male cannot overcome a lousy female in breeding dogs. That's my observation that I've seen. So, what does the male contribute then? The male contributes prepotency. In other words, most lines of dogs are based on the male ancestor having had inbreeding in him. by having common ancestor he's line bred upon, repeated in the pedigree. Therefore, he's prepotent. That's what the male contributes. The female contributes mitochondrial DNA. So if you want to create a line of dogs, let's say for guiding the blind, you now see some of the Heritage Foundation of the Blind crossing golden retrievers and Labrador retrievers. Why? They're not crossing necessarily the two breeds. They're crossing an animal, golden retriever or Labrador retriever, which exhibited the qualities that was good at guiding a blind person, and another dog which was good at guiding a blind person, and they bred them together. In other words, they're not trying to create a new breed. It's a performance breeding for the attributes of guiding a blind person. So that's a performance breeding, but this is the quality they're looking for. Ability to be a good service animal. So that's a kind of performance breeding. So basically they're not breeding by phenotype or genotype, they're breeding by qualities, and they're hoping they're heritable. Now, the puppies that come out, which is a mix of golden retriever and Labrador retriever, what breed are they? They're neither breed, right? But to get the qualities I wanted to pass on, let's say the father is a Labrador retriever, I would breed back to that father to amplify his traits. If that's what, you know, if you don't mind breeding that close. What's another way of doing it? Another way of doing it is what's called a 2 or 3 line breeding. You would take 2 half siblings, same father, that Labrador retriever, 2 golden retriever moms, in my example, and you create puppies from each female. Now, you have half siblings, brother and sisters, which are half siblings, common father, different moms. This sister would not be bred to her own half brother. She would be bred to another dog, and her daughter would be bred to her half brother, not her herself. That's an uncle to niece mating, or 2-3. You will get a dog with a 37.5% coefficient of relationship, or 9.63% coefficient of inbreeding, which is a very high coefficient of inbreeding. So what I'm saying is, there are various strategies that tries to balance the risk versus rewards in line breeding. The risk is loss of hybrid vigor, loss of fertility, loss of health, and the greater potential for disease. The benefit is you're locking in traits and attributes you desire that you need in the service of mankind. In other words, that dog serving a blind person so that person doesn't get killed by a car or a bus crossing the street. That dog is performing a service where it's giving its life purpose in helping mankind, that owner of which is a blind person, right? So you're breeding animals in the service of mankind. Do you want to concentrate those genes so they can be reliably passed on? The answer is you do. How would you do it? There's only one way to do it. To increase the genes of the ancestor that exhibits those traits. So line breeding means that this ancestor, which is the ideal representative of the qualities you want, has to be recreated. Recreating directly means breeding father to daughter, because that offspring is 75% him. Now, that's too tight in most cases, but that's how most dog breeds are initially created. But once they're created, this is no longer necessary. How else would you do it? You would do first cousin mating, 3-3, or uncle to niece mating. Now, can you keep doing it without incurring problems? No, you can't. You have to outcross, at least in the 3rd generation. You have to cross out, which is called an outcross, and then cross back in, so to restore hybrid vigor. But the bottom line is, the coefficient of inbreeding is a mathematical tool to balance the risk to reward ratio. In other words, it's a measure of risk. At which level of inbreeding am I getting the results I desire, and that the animal exhibits the attributes I want it to exhibit, but at the same time I avoid disease and lack of good health or good vigor. That balancing act between locking in desirable attributes while not having disease, that's what the coefficient of inbreeding is about. That is the purpose of this mathematical tool, to decrease the odds of disease while increasing the odds of repeatable traits. So, what is the better strategy? Breeding by phenotype or by genotype? Breeding by genotype, because then you can assure yourself of repeatable traits. Thank you for your time. I hope this was educational, if not long, and I appreciate you watching this channel. Talk to you soon.